Most analysts Business World surveyed were split on the inflation reading for July, with 10 anticipating a softer headline figure and 9 expecting a faster one. Our next guest is one of the 9. In fact, he has the hottest inflation forecast for July at 6.9%. Let's bring him in. Marco Antonio Agonia, economist at University of Asia and the Pacific, joining us now. It's good seeing you, Marco. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning, Kathy. Good morning to the viewers as well.
Yeah, so what do you make of the result? It's a lot slower than your own forecast.
Yeah, well, really, it's a good thing to be wrong in this case. In fact, it's probably one of the most favorable outcomes that we could have asked for. Definitely below consensus estimates and therefore my estimates. I think in this case, we were anticipating much sharper increases in transport and food. But in this case, it's good that we were proven wrong, I suppose.
All right, it's good to be wrong. In this case, more favorable for the rest of us. But what about the second round effects? Now that we know what we do of a slower inflation result for July.
Yeah, well, the second round effects are still going through the economy. Core inflation is still above that 2 to 4% target band that the BSP is very comfortable with. So really, it's a developing story. What this shows now is that there is less pressure in general for the entire economy to raise its prices, especially when you go down to your tertiary level services sectors, where really the brunt of core inflation is where it's going to be in. So with this lower headline inflation reading, it's a bit of reprieve, but the fight's not over yet.
Yeah, fight is not over. We just got the core inflation result for July. It's come in at 4.2%. That is also a lot slower than in June, when we've seen the fastest pace in nearly 3 years. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, really, this comes because the anticipated increases that I had for my 6.9% forecast were probably not as extreme as expected. And the other part is the minimum wage increase in the NCR was temporarily restrained. So the pass-through effects from that might not be felt right now when we thought it would actually be pushing through. So there's less pressure in general on services downstream to raise their prices and therefore raise core inflation. But again, it's still above target, and we're only beginning to move towards a slightly more favorable outcome.
True, because when you look at the BSP ceiling, that's 4%, and it's still a lot higher. And in fact, a fifth straight month that the BSP ceiling had been breached. So what are the expectations then on how you'll be recomputing so that you'll come right down closer to what August figures may be, and how your forecast will look like for the rest of the year?
Yeah, well, really, with this new inflation reading, it's good news for the Philippines, right? Definitely good news. In this case, we will probably look closer at how food prices have developed through these past months. And again, we're also looking at the potential uncertainties when it comes to things in the future. We're not sure if the government will really pick up most of its infrastructure spending, if this will be inflationary. And we're also not sure about the aggressive El Nino that is going to, has been touted to happen in the next few months. We still need to see more data on that, but hopefully we can recalibrate our models by then. For the rest of the year, we're still seeing definitely above target inflation, probably within the range of 6 to 7%. As I said, the fight's not over yet. But at this level, at the very least, it might goad BSP into a less defensive stance moving forward.
All right, fight is not over yet, and I know that you've made a mention of wages temporarily suspended. What sort of scenarios do we face when that temporary suspension is over by August 13th?
Yeah, we think that this will definitely add a little bit to headline inflation, the degree of which it's up for debate. We still have to do our calculations. But what's the really scary thing about this is if the NCR wage increase does push through, the other ones in other regions in the Philippines might also follow with it. And if everyone else raises minimum wages at this point in time in the economy, we're worried that it might add a little more inflation pressure moving forward, especially when we get into Q4 when jobs hiring does tend to pick up a bit.
Yeah, in fact, the central bank governor himself had made a mention of wage pressures. That was the key consideration coming into this inflation result. What now? What sort of expectations? You said the fight is not over yet. I would presume that the fight is in the monetary policy maneuvers that come right after, or in fact on August 27th when they next meet.
Yeah, for this, we're actually penciling in 50 basis points more of rate hikes for the BSP. So 25 basis points in August and another 25 basis points in their next meeting. We think that this is a moderately conservative level that the BSP has to just manage because they could raise rates to above the expected inflation rate for this year, but we think that would be too contractionary meanwhile, because this kind of decision is something that's done today, but has effects 24 months into the future. And we've already known that the IMF and all of these multilaterals have downgraded the growth outlook for the Philippines for this year and the next. So it's really now a balancing. And I'd say the burden is now more on the national government to try and soften these price pressures for most Filipinos. Monetary policy, in my opinion, can only do so much. Yeah.
Yeah, 50 bips was based on 6.9% of an inflation forecast. What are the chances, though, that they could wait? Because it's a lot slower than forecast, the median forecast in the Business World Survey.
Well, we don't think that they're going to wait. If anything, I was penciling in more of a chance of an emergency rate hike off cycle. But in this case, because inflation has become lower, but and then again, core inflation is still above that comfortable 2 to 4% target. I think it's going to let BSP just continue on its normal path. And by August, I think its normal path will be to hike by 25 basis points.
All right, what are your forecasts for GDP as that's out on Friday and pretty much giving us a picture of how growth is growing as inflation stays elevated?
Well, that's the harsh part. We think that Q2 GDP growth did slow down to 2.5%. That's our estimate. The fact of the matter is most of the Middle East crisis occurred during that second quarter. Historically, the second quarter is not really where we see a lot of growth to begin with. So we think that Q2 GDP did slow down, but again, we're hoping that we'll be surprised, we'll be wrong in a more favorable way. Yeah.
All right, well, what about jobs? Because that data is out tomorrow, Thursday. What are we going to get? And how much of a concern might it be that underemployment gets to be the more toxic figure than unemployment?
Well, it's definitely a salient risk that has appeared throughout this year so far. The employment figures themselves are already quite tepid. Employment in general, in levels, has been below 50 million for most of this year already. The underemployment rate, meanwhile, is what we're truly concerned with because it reflects the structural fragilities of the Philippine economy. And moving forward, unless we see really clear drivers of growth that can facilitate the creation of higher value jobs, more valuable, more productive kinds of hiring activity, then we can probably say that underemployment is going to continue plaguing the labor market for the rest of the year as well.
The peso open is a lot easier to remember at 60.999. We're coming all the way from 61.165. What do you make of the initial reaction in the peso?
Well, it's definitely more constructive. The traders are really working on more constructive news right now. Inflation is softer than expected, so of course the peso is going to strengthen based on what we know. But I think moving forward, the more interesting thing would be to look at what the Fed is doing because there is a lot of volatility happening as regards the Fed decision. Right now, I'm looking at the CME Fed Watch figures. The decision is actually, the market consensus is pretty split. And historically, in the run up to another Fed meeting, the peso tends to see a lot of volatility moving forward. So assuming that inflation will be contained within the 6 to 7% target band without many surprises, then we think the outlook for the peso dollar rate might go towards 62 towards the end of the year, or about 61 to 62. Yeah.
All right, as a final point, as we have a slowing inflation, how is it going to feel like, you think, for consumers in restaurants and in gas stations? Will it make a difference?
Yeah, well, it will make a difference, but not immediately, definitely not right now. We say that inflation is slowing down, it still means that inflation is positive. Things are still getting more expensive. And for the average Filipino, that is really what's quite demoralizing to existence, especially with limited household budgets. For the average Filipino, you might see that your food bill, your grocery bills might be more expensive at a slower pace. For Gen Z, maybe you'll see your bouldering and your pickleball fees being maybe a little more expensive, but not as much as in previous months. So there's a slowdown here, but again, the fight is not over and prices are still rising at a fairly uncomfortable rate for most Filipino households. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those Gen Zs will hold on to their pickleball expense. Thank you so much for joining us. Marco Antonio Agonia of the UANP.